The stench of whiskey and cigar smoke hung in the air as Nathaniel Zimmer clutched the edge of the stage coach door, her knuckles white with terror. The journey west had been a nightmare she hadn't anticipated when she'd answered that advertisement in the Philadelphia newspaper 3 months ago. Now, as the coach rattled to a stop in the dusty main street of Socorro, New Mexico territory, she wondered if she'd made the gravest mistake of her 22 years. It was 1875, and the promise of a new life had turned into something far more sinister than she could have imagined. The bruises on her wrists and the cut above her left eye told a story she wasn't ready to share. She had escaped the clutches of the man who had intercepted her journey in Santa Fe, claiming to be sent by her intended husband. 3 days of hell later, she had managed to flee when he drunk himself into a stupor, stealing enough money for the final leg of her journey to Socorro. "End of the line, miss," the driver called down, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Socorro, New Mexico." Nathaniel hesitated, her small carpetbag clutched to her chest. She wore her second-best dress, now wrinkled and stained from the journey. Her auburn hair, once neatly pinned, had fallen in disarray around her shoulders. How could she possibly meet her future husband looking like this? "What would he think? What would he do? Madam, you getting down?" The driver's voice held a note of impatience now. With a deep breath, Nathaniel stepped down onto the dusty street, wincing as her ankle twisted during her escape protested the weight. The bright southwestern sun momentarily blinded her, and she raised a trembling hand to shield her eyes. The town of Socorro sprawled before her, a collection of adobe buildings, wooden structures, and dusty streets. Mountains rose in the distance, their purple-blue silhouettes stark against the clear sky. People bustled about their business, some pausing to glance curiously at the stage coach's latest arrival. Nathaniel felt exposed, vulnerable. She had the letter in her pocket, a letter from a man named Abram Garrett, a rancher outside Socorro who had advertised for a wife. She had responded, exchanging several letters before agreeing to come west. They had arranged to meet at the stagecoach stop on this very day. Her eyes scanned the faces of those gathered, seeking anyone who might be looking for her. The terror of the past days made her heart hammer in her chest. What if the man from Santa Fe had somehow telegraphed ahead? What if he had connections here? A tall figure separated from the crowd and approached her. He wore a worn leather vest over a faded blue shirt, dusty denim trousers, and boots that had seen many miles. A wide-brimmed hat shaded his face, but she could see he had a strong jaw, dusted with several days' growth of beard. His eyes were a startling blue against his sun-bronzed skin. "Miss Zimmer?" His voice was deep, with a slight drawl. Nathaniel took an instinctive step back, nearly stumbling as her injured ankle gave way. The man's hand shot out, steadying her, but he withdrew it quickly when she flinched from his touch. "I'm Abram Garrett," he said, keeping his distance now. "I believe you're expecting me." Nathaniel nodded, unable to find her voice. This was him then. The man whose letters had seemed so considerate, so different from the men she'd known back east. The man she had agreed to marry. Abram's eyes narrowed as he took in her disheveled appearance, lingering on the cut above her eye and the way she favored her right ankle. His expression darkened. "You're hurt," he stated, his voice tight with controlled anger. "What happened?" The concern in his voice nearly broke her. Tears threatened, but she blinked them back furiously. She would not cry in the middle of the street in front of this stranger who was to be her husband. "There was trouble on the journey," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "A man in Santa Fe who claimed you'd sent him." Understanding dawned in Abram's eyes, followed by a flash of fury that made Nathaniel step back again, despite herself, but the anger wasn't directed at her. "I sent no one," he said firmly. Whoever he was, he lied. Nathaniel nodded, having already concluded as much during her desperate escape. "I know that now." Abram looked around the busy street, then back at her. His expression softened. "You need a doctor and rest. My wagon's this way." He reached for her carpetbag, careful not to touch her. "May I?" Nathaniel hesitated only briefly before relinquishing her bag. He nodded toward a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 chestnut horses at the edge of the street. "I don't think you're in any condition to discuss our arrangement today," he he said as they walked slowly toward the wagon, Abram matching his pace to her limping gait. "There's a good doctor in town. After that, I've arranged a room for you at Mrs. Wilkins' boarding house." Nathaniel stopped, confusion clouding her features. "But I thought that you'd come straight to the ranch as my wife." Abram shook his head. "That was the plan before." His eyes lingered on her injuries. "Things have changed, you need time, and you should have the chance to change your mind if that's what you want." Relief washed over her, so powerful it made her knees weak. Abram Garrett noticed and moved as if to catch her, but stopped himself. "Miss Zimmer," he said, his voice low and intense. "I don't know exactly what happened to you on your journey here, but I promise you this: no one will touch you again. Not without your permission. Not while I'm around." The words hung in the air between them, a solemn vow spoken by a stranger that somehow carried more weight than all the empty promises Nathaniel had heard throughout her life. She found herself nodding, accepting this promise, though she still didn't know if she could trust him. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, not after what had happened. "Thank you, Mr. Garrett," she said softly. He helped her into the wagon, careful to support her without making her uncomfortable, then climbed up beside her. As he took up the reins, he glanced at her. "Just so we're clear, Miss Zimmer," he said, "the man who hurt you, if I ever find him, he'll answer to me." With that, he flicked the reins, and the wagon pulled away from the stagecoach stop, taking Nathaniel toward an uncertain future in this harsh, beautiful land. Dr. Thomas Jenkins had kind eyes and a gentle touch. His office, attached to his home on a quiet side street in Socorro, smelled of antiseptic and herbs. His wife, a round-faced woman named Martha, assisted him, her movements efficient and motherly. "The ankle's not broken, Doctor," Jenkins declared after his examination. "A bad sprain, that's all. It'll heal with rest." He cleaned the cut above her eye. "This won't scar, thankfully. You're lucky." Lucky wasn't the word Nathaniel would have chosen, but she nodded anyway. Abram Garrett stood just outside the examining room, his hat in his hands, his tall frame partially visible through the doorway. "I'd like to ask Miss Zimmer some questions privately," the doctor said, glancing toward Abram. "Of course." Abram nodded and stepped fully out of sight. "Martha, would you brew some of that willow bark tea?" Dr. Jenkins asked his wife. When they were alone, he pulled up a stool and sat facing Nathaniel. "Miss Zimmer, I need to ask, were you assaulted in other ways?" Nathaniel's cheeks flushed with embarrassment, but she understood the question's necessity. "No," she answered truthfully. He struck me when I tried to escape, and he grabbed me roughly." She showed the bruises on her wrists. "But nothing more than that. I got away before." The doctor nodded, relief evident in his eyes. "That's good, very good." He hesitated. "Mr. Garrett mentioned you're his mail-order bride." "Yes, though I don't know if that arrangement still stands." "Abram Garrett is a good man," Dr. Jenkins said, "one of the best in these parts. He's built that ranch of his from nothing over the past 5 years. Works harder than any 2 men I know." He smiled. "And he's a fair hand at doctoring livestock, too. Comes to me for advice sometimes, but he's got a natural way with animals." Nathaniel wasn't sure why the doctor was telling her this, but she listened politely. "What I mean to say," Dr. Jenkins continued, "is that whatever you decide about your arrangement, you're safe with him. Not all men out here can say the same." Martha returned with a steaming cup of tea, which she handed to Nathaniel. "Drink this, dear. It'll help with the pain." The tea was bitter but not unpleasant. While she sipped it, Dr. Jenkins wrapped her ankle and gave instructions for its care. When they were finished, Martha helped her straighten her clothing and tidy her hair. "You'll need to stay off that ankle as much as possible for at least a week," the doctor said. "And no corsets until those ribs heal. They're bruised, not broken, but they need time." Abram was waiting in the front room, speaking quietly with a deputy marshal. He broke off their conversation when Nathaniel appeared, supported by Martha. "I've told Tom what you shared with me," Abram said, "about what happened in Santa Fe." The deputy, a weathered man with a silver mustache, tipped his hat to her. "Miss Zimmer, I'm Deputy Marshal Frank Wilson. I'd like to get a description of this man if you're feeling up to it." Nathaniel provided what details she could remember: the man's height, his dark beard with strands of gray, the scar that curved from his left eye to his ear, the way he limped slightly on his right side. The deputy took notes, his expression grim. "Sounds like it might be Edwin Blackwell," he said when she finished. "He's wanted in 3 territories. I'll wire the marshals in Santa Fe." He touched his hat brim again. "Rest assured, miss, we'll do everything we can to find him." After the deputy left, Abram helped Nathaniel into the wagon. They rode in silence through the streets of Socorro, which were quieter now as afternoon stretched toward evening. The town was larger than Nathaniel had first thought, with several streets of businesses, homes, a church with a tall steeple, and even a small schoolhouse, Mrs. Wilkins' boarding house stood at the edge of town, a 2-story structure with a wide porch and window boxes filled with hardy desert flowers. The landlady herself came out to meet them, a tall, spare woman with gray hair pulled into a severe bun and sharp eyes that softened when she saw Nathaniel's condition. "Oh, you poor dear," she said. "Abram told me you'd had trouble on your journey, but he didn't say how bad." "I'm all right, truly," Nathaniel insisted, though even she didn't believe her words. Mrs. Wilkins helped her inside and up to a small but clean room on the 2nd floor. There was a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a washstand with a pitcher and bowl, a small writing desk, and a rocking chair by the window that overlooked the street. "I'll bring up some supper in a bit," Mrs. Wilkins said. "You just rest now." Abram had carried up her carpetbag and set it by the bed. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, hat in hand. "I'll call on you tomorrow if that's agreeable," he said. "We can talk then about everything. No decisions need to be made right away." Nathaniel nodded, suddenly exhausted beyond words. "Thank you, Mr. Garrett, for everything." A small smile touched his lips. "Abram, please, I think after all this you can use my Christian name." "Then you must call me Nathaniel," she replied, the ghost of a smile crossing her own face. "Nathaniel," he repeated, as if testing the feel of her name. "It suits you, strong name." With that, he bid her good night and left her alone with her thoughts. Nathaniel sank into the rocking chair, her mind whirling. This day had been nothing like she'd imagined when she'd first decided to become a mail-order bride. After her father's death had left her penniless in Philadelphia, with no family and few prospects, the advertisement in the matrimonial news had seemed like divine providence. "Rancher in New Mexico Territory seeks honest, hard-working woman of good character for matrimony. Must be willing to leave Eastern comforts for frontier life. Age 20-30 preferred. Photograph appreciated but not required." She had responded with a carefully worded letter and a small daguerreotype of herself. Abram Garrett's reply had come 3 weeks later, respectful, direct, and with an offer that seemed fair. He would pay her passage west, and in return, she would agree to a 6-month trial marriage. If after that time either party wished to dissolve the arrangement, he would pay her return fare east. It had seemed sensible. Safe even. Now nothing seemed safe. Mrs. Wilkins brought up a tray with a bowl of hearty stew, fresh bread, and a cup of coffee. Nathaniel ate mechanically, not tasting the food but grateful for its warmth. After washing up as best she could with her injured ankle, she changed into her nightgown and crawled into bed. Sleep didn't come easily. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Blackwell's face, felt his rough hands on her arms. She jolted awake several times during the night, heart pounding, before finally falling into an exhausted slumber as dawn was breaking over the distant mountains. Abram Garrett stood on his porch, staring out at the land that had become his home. The Triple G Ranch spread across 500 acres of New Mexico territory, with the Rio Grande cutting through the western edge of his property. The main house was modest but solid, built of adobe and timber with his own hands, with help from some of the local men he'd hired. He had cattle, not as many as some of the bigger spreads, but a decent herd that was growing each year. He had good grazing land, water rights, and a small orchard that was beginning to bear fruit. By most measures, he was successful, but success meant little without someone to share it with. At 32, Abram had watched his friends marry and start families. He'd helped build additions to their homes for new babies, attended christenings and birthday celebrations, and returned each night to an empty house. The decision to advertise for a wife hadn't been made lightly. He'd courted a few local women over the years, but none had seemed right. When he'd received Nathaniel Zimmer's letter, something about her straightforward manner and quiet dignity had appealed to him immediately. Her photograph had revealed a woman with serious eyes and a determined set to her jaw, not conventionally beautiful perhaps, but striking in her own way. Now she was here, but under circumstances he couldn't have imagined. The thought of what she must have endured on her journey made his blood boil. He'd meant what he said: if he ever found the man who'd hurt her, there would be a reckoning. But for now, his priority was ensuring Nathaniel's comfort and recovery. If after that she decided to return east, he would accept her decision, however much it might disappoint him. He wouldn't hold her to an agreement made before such a traumatic experience. With these thoughts swirling in his mind, Abram watched the sun rise over his land, painting the desert in shades of gold and rose. Then he turned and went inside to prepare for his visit to town. Nathaniel awakened to the smell of coffee and biscuits. Mrs. Wilkins had brought up a breakfast tray and was setting it on the small writing desk. "Good morning, dear," the older woman said. "Did you sleep at all?" "Some," Nathaniel admitted, sitting up slowly. Her body ached from the events of the past days and her ankle throbbed dully. "Doctor Jenkins sent over this salve for your bruises," Mrs. Wilkins said, indicating a small jar on the tray. "And he says to keep that ankle elevated as much as possible." Nathaniel thanked her and managed to eat most of the breakfast. The coffee was strong and reviving, and the biscuits were light and flaky, served with butter and honey. "Is there somewhere I might purchase some new clothing?" Nathaniel asked as Mrs. Wilkins collected the tray. "Most of my things were left behind." She didn't want to explain that her trunk, containing nearly everything she owned, remained in Santa Fe, likely in Blackwell's possession. "There's Hoffman's General Store on the main street," Mrs. Wilkins replied. "They carry ready-made dresses and such. Or if you prefer something made to measure, Mrs. Diaz is the best seamstress in town. Her shop is just off the square." "Thank you. I'll need to find work as well to pay for my room and board until—" She trailed off, uncertain how to continue. Mrs. Wilkins gave her a shrewd look. "Until you decide about Mr. Garrett, you mean?" Nathaniel nodded, flushing slightly. "Well, as for the room and board, that's already settled. Abram paid for 2 weeks in advance," Mrs. Wilkins said. "And he was quite insistent that you were not to know, so I suppose I've just broken a confidence." She didn't look particularly troubled by this. "As for work, we can discuss that when you're properly healed. No need to rush things." After Mrs. Wilkins left, Nathaniel washed and dressed as best she could. She had only the one dress besides her traveling outfit, which Mrs. Wilkins had taken to be laundered. She brushed and pinned up her hair, trying to make herself presentable. Around mid-morning, there was a knock at her door. When she called out permission to enter, Abram appeared, hat in hand. He was freshly shaved today, his dark blonde hair neatly combed. In the clear light of day, Nathaniel could see that his eyes weren't simply blue, but a striking shade that reminded her of the sky after a storm. "Good morning, Nathaniel," he said. "How are you feeling today?" "Better, thank you," she replied, gesturing for him to take the chair while she remained seated on the edge of the bed. "Dr. Jenkins' remedies are quite effective." Abram nodded, placing his hat on his knee. An awkward silence fell between them. "I've brought something for you," he said finally, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small leather pouch and held it out to her. "It's not much, but I thought you might need it." Nathaniel accepted the pouch with a curious expression. Opening it, she found several silver dollars and a few banknotes. Her eyes widened. "I can't accept this," she said immediately, trying to hand it back. "It's not charity," Abram said firmly, refusing to take the pouch. "Consider it an advance on our arrangement if you like. Or a loan to be repaid when you're able. But you need clothes and personal items, and I won't have you going without because of what happened on your journey here." Nathaniel hesitated, then slowly put the pouch in her pocket. "Thank you, I will repay you." Abram nodded, seeming relieved that she had accepted. "I thought if you're feeling up to it, I might take you to town tomorrow, show you around Socorro a bit, introduce you to some folks." He paused, "and maybe we could talk more about what happens next." "I'd like that," Nathaniel said, surprising herself with the realization that it was true. "Good." Abram smiled, and the expression transformed his face, softening the hard lines and lighting up his eyes. That's good. They talked for a while longer, cautiously finding their way through the awkwardness of their situation. Abram told her about his ranch, about the town of Socorro and its inhabitants, about the land that he had come to love. Nathaniel spoke of Philadelphia, of her father who had been a bookbinder, of her life, before answering Abram's advertisement. What neither discussed directly was the arrangement that had brought her west, or what would become of it now. That conversation loomed on the horizon, but for today, they were simply two people becoming acquainted. When Abram left an hour later, Nathaniel found herself smiling genuinely for the first time since leaving Philadelphia. There was something about Abram Garrett, a steadiness, a quiet strength that made her feel safe in his presence, despite everything that had happened. That afternoon, Mrs. Wilkins helped her down to the parlor, where Nathaniel met some of the other boarders, a young schoolteacher named Miss Palmer, an elderly gentleman who had once been a circuit judge, and a middle-aged couple who ran the local newspaper. They were curious about the newcomer, but respectful of her privacy, not pressing when she gave only the briefest explanation of her presence in Socorro. After supper in the boarding house dining room, Nathaniel returned to her room and sat by the window, watching as the town settled into evening. Lamps were lit in windows, a few cowboys rode through on their way to the saloon at the end of the street, and the distant sound of a piano drifted up from somewhere. This place was so different from Philadelphia, with its crowded streets and constant noise. The sky here seemed bigger somehow, the air clearer. Despite everything, there was something appealing about Socorro, about the openness of the land and the directness of its people. As darkness fell, Nathaniel took out a sheet of paper from the desk drawer and began to write, putting down her thoughts and feelings about this strange new chapter in her life. Writing had always helped her make sense of things, and now, more than ever, she needed clarity. The next morning dawned clear and warm. Nathaniel dressed in her freshly laundered traveling outfit, which Mrs. Wilkins had somehow managed to remove most of the stains from. Her ankle still pained her, but not as severely as before. She could put weight on it now, though she still moved slowly. Abram arrived promptly at 10 o'clock with a light buggy instead of the wagon, explaining that it would be more comfortable for her injured ankle. He helped her down the porch steps and into the buggy with a gentle steadiness that was becoming familiar. Socorro was busy this morning, with ranchers and townspeople going about their business. Abram drove slowly down the main street, pointing out buildings of interest: the bank, the telegraph office, the sheriff's office where Deputy Wilson worked, several stores, the small hotel, and 3 saloons of varying degrees of respectability. Most of the families attend church there, Abram said, indicating a whitewashed building with a tall steeple. Reverend Mills is a good man, practical in his preaching, which suits the people here. Nathaniel nodded, taking in everything. She had attended church regularly in Philadelphia and found comfort in the familiar rituals. Perhaps here, too, she might find that same sense of community and peace. They stopped at Hoffman's General Store, where Abram helped her down from the buggy. The store was large and well-stocked, with everything from farm implements to bolts of fabric, ready-made clothing to foodstuffs. Mr. Garrett, a jovial man with a magnificent mustache, came forward, hand outstretched. "Good to see you, and this must be Miss Zimmer." "Nathan, this is Oscar Hoffman," Abram said. "He owns the store and knows just about everything that happens in Socorro." "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Zimmer," Hoffman said, shaking her hand with enthusiasm. "We've been looking forward to your arrival." "Abram here has been fixing up that ranch house for months, getting ready." Nathaniel glanced at Abram, who looked somewhat embarrassed. "Has he indeed?" "Oh yes," Hoffman continued, oblivious to Abram's discomfort. "New curtains, better furniture, even had me order in some fancy tea from back east. Said his future wife would appreciate the comforts of home." "Mr. Hoffman," Abram interrupted, "Miss Zimmer needs to purchase some items. Perhaps you could show her the ladies' section while I pick up a few things I need." Of course, of course." Hoffman led Nathaniel to the back of the store, where racks of ready-made dresses and shelves of women's items were displayed. Mrs. Hoffman handles this section. She'll be right with you." Mrs. Hoffman proved to be as friendly as her husband, but more perceptive. Seeing Nathaniel's injured ankle and the fading bruises, she led her to a private corner and helped her select several practical but attractive dresses, undergarments, stockings, and a pair of sturdy boots. "These are on special," Mrs. Hoffman said, showing Nathaniel a pretty set of hair combs. "Every lady needs something frivolous now and then." Nathaniel smiled and added them to her purchases. With Mrs. Hoffman's help, she selected a few more necessities, including a warm shawl for the cooler evenings. When Abram returned, Nathaniel was just settling her bill. He insisted on carrying her packages to the buggy, then suggested they visit the cafe down the street for lunch. "Best apple pie in the territory," he promised. The cafe was run by a French immigrant named Marcel, who greeted them with exuberant warmth. "Ah, Monsieur Garrett, and this must be the fiancé you have told us about," enchanted Mademoiselle. They were shown to a table by the window, where they could watch the activity on the street while enjoying their meal. The food was surprisingly good stew with fresh bread, followed by the promised apple pie, which lived up to Abram's praise. As they ate, Abram pointed out various townspeople passing by, sharing little stories about them. Nathaniel found herself relaxing, drawn in by his easy conversation and obvious affection for the town and its inhabitants. "How did you come to Socorro?" she asked as they finished their pie. "You mentioned you've been here 5 years," Abram nodded, setting down his fork. "I came west after the war, served in the Union Army, 2nd Ohio Volunteer Infantry. After Appomattox, I couldn't see my way clear to going back to farm life in Ohio. Too many memories." His expression clouded briefly. "Drifted for a while, working ranches in Texas, then Kansas. Made my way to New Mexico territory, liked what I saw, and decided to put down roots." "You built your ranch from nothing?" Nathaniel asked, impressed despite herself. "Started with 40 acres and a broken-down cabin," Abram confirmed, a hint of pride in his voice. "Worked other men's land while improving my own. Bought cattle when I could afford them, bred them carefully. Added more land as I was able." He shrugged. "It's not the biggest spread in the territory, but it's mine, free and clear." Nathaniel found herself wanting to see this ranch he spoke of with such quiet pride. "And now you wanted a wife," she said, broaching the subject that had hovered between them. Abram met her eyes steadily. I do." He hesitated. "But I understand if recent events have changed your thoughts on our arrangement." Nathaniel considered her words carefully. "I admit I'm uncertain. What happened in Santa Fe has made me wary." She twisted her napkin in her lap. "But it wasn't your fault. And you've been kind, far kinder than I expected under the circumstances." "Kindness isn't something that needs to be earned, Nathaniel," Abram said quietly. "It should be freely given." Those simple words touched something deep within her. How different this man was from those she had known in Philadelphia, where society's rules dictated every interaction. "I'd like to propose a modification to our original arrangement," Abram continued. "Stay in Socorro for a time, get to know the town, the people. Get to know me as a friend first, not as a husband. When your ankle is healed, I'll show you the ranch, but you can continue to stay at Mrs. Wilkins' boarding house if that makes you more comfortable." "And if, after that, I still wish to leave?" Nathaniel asked. "Then I'll honor my promise to pay your fare back east," Abram said without hesitation. No obligations, no recriminations. It was more than fair, and Nathaniel found herself nodding. "I accept your proposal, Mr. Garrett." "Abram," he reminded her with a small smile. "Abram," she agreed, returning his smile hesitantly. As they left the cafe, Nathaniel felt lighter somehow, as if a burden had been lifted. There were still uncertainties ahead, but for the first time since the nightmare in Santa Fe, she felt a flicker of hope for her future in this rugged territory. The next 2 weeks passed in a comfortable routine. Each day, Abram would come to the boarding house in the late morning, and they would spend a few hours together, sometimes going out in the buggy, sometimes sitting in Mrs. Wilkins' parlor, getting to know one another. Nathaniel's ankle improved steadily, and the bruises faded from her skin. More importantly, the fear that had gripped her began to recede. She became acquainted with several of Socorro's residents and found them to be generally welcoming and kind. She met Reverend Mills and his wife, who invited her to attend Sunday services. She visited Mrs. Diaz's seamstress shop and commissioned 2 new dresses, using some of the money Abram had given her. She spent time at the small lending library attached to the schoolhouse, where Miss Palmer, the young teacher who also boarded at Mrs. Wilkins', introduced her to several other women of the town. Throughout it all, Abram was a steady presence, attentive but not overbearing, respectful of her boundaries, and unfailingly patient. He told her stories of ranch life, of cattle drives and roundups, of the beauty of the land in different seasons. His quiet enthusiasm was infectious, and Nathaniel found herself increasingly curious about the place that had captured his heart so completely. Deputy Wilson brought news that Edwin Blackwell had indeed been in Santa Fe, but had left the territory, reportedly heading into Arizona. The knowledge that her attacker was moving away from Socorro eased Nathaniel's mind considerably, though she still found herself looking over her shoulder sometimes, especially in the evenings. On a warm Saturday, nearly 3 weeks after her arrival in Socorro, Nathaniel sat on the boarding house porch with Mrs. Wilkins, shelling peas for supper. Her ankle was almost completely healed now, with only occasional twinges when she walked too long. Abram Garrett is a patient man, Mrs. Wilkins remarked, her hands moving deftly among the pea pods. Not many would be so understanding in his position. Nathaniel's hands stilled momentarily. "What do you mean?" The older woman gave her a knowing look. "He paid for a bride, and instead he's been courting you like a gentleman caller without any certainty of the outcome." She resumed her shelling. "That speaks well of him, I think." "Yes," Nathaniel agreed softly. "It does." The truth was, she had been thinking more and more about Abram and the decision that loomed before her. Their daily conversations had revealed a man of integrity, intelligence, and quiet humor. He was well-read despite his frontier life, with a small but carefully chosen collection of books he'd told her about. He treated everyone, from the banker to the stable boy, with the same direct respect, and he never, not once, made her feel rushed or pressured about their arrangement. In short, he was becoming exactly the kind of man she might have chosen for herself had circumstances been different. "He's asked to take me to see the ranch tomorrow," Nathaniel said. "After church." Mrs. Wilkins nodded approvingly. "The Triple G is a fine property. You should see it before you make any decisions." That evening, after supper, Nathaniel wrote in her journal, attempting to sort through her conflicting emotions. The memory of her terrifying experience in Santa Fe still haunted her, but it was fading, replaced by newer, more pleasant memories of Socorro and its people, and especially of Abram. Was she ready to become a rancher's wife, miles from town, responsible for a household in this untamed territory? The thought was both frightening and, surprisingly, somewhat exciting. Nathaniel had always been practical, responsible. Her father had relied on her to manage their household after her mother's death when Nathaniel was 15. She knew how to work hard, how to make do with little. But marriage was a different matter entirely. She had received proposals in Philadelphia too, to be exact, but neither man had stirred any particular emotion in her heart. They had been practical offers, just as Abram's had been. The difference was that now, after knowing Abram for these weeks, she found herself caring for him in a way she hadn't anticipated. The question was whether that feeling was enough to build a life upon. The next day dawned clear and bright. Nathaniel dressed carefully in her best dress, a deep blue that complemented her auburn hair, and accompanied Mrs. Wilkins to the church service. Abram was waiting for them, standing outside the whitewashed building with several other ranchers and their families. He smiled when he saw her, his eyes warming. "You look lovely today," he said simply. Nathaniel felt a flush of pleasure at his words. "Thank you. It's a beautiful morning for church." The service was straightforward and heartfelt, with Reverend Mills preaching on the importance of community and mutual support. The congregation sang hymns with enthusiasm, if not always perfect tune, and there was a general feeling of goodwill that Nathaniel found comforting. After the service, there was a social hour, with the women of the church providing coffee and baked goods. Nathaniel found herself drawn into conversations with several of the ranchers' wives, who were curious about the newcomer from the east. They were friendly, offering advice about life in the territory and extending invitations to visit their homes. When it was time to leave, Abram led her to his buggy, which was freshly polished for the occasion. "Ready to see the Triple G?" he asked, helping her up. "I am," Nathaniel replied, settling her skirts. She felt a flutter of nervousness but also anticipation. The ride out of Socorro took them west, following the curve of the Rio Grande for a time, before turning onto a well-maintained dirt road that wound through grasslands dotted with mesquite and juniper. The mountains rose in the distance, their slopes covered in pine and oak at the higher elevations. "There," Abram said after about 45 minutes, pointing ahead. "That's Triple G land, from that fence line all the way to the ridge of hills there." Nathaniel saw a vast expanse of grazing land, where cattle small in the distance moved leisurely through the grass. A creek cut through the property, lined with cottonwoods that provided shade. And there, nestled against the backdrop of the hills, stood a house not large but solidly built, with a wide porch and several outbuildings nearby. As they drew closer, Nathaniel could see more details. The house was constructed of adobe with wooden trim, painted a clean white that stood out against the landscape. There was a barn, a bunkhouse, corrals, and what appeared to be a kitchen garden to one side of the house. Several horses grazed in a fenced pasture near the barn. "It's beautiful," Nathaniel said, meaning it. There was an order, a harmony to the ranch that spoke of careful planning and hard work. Abram's expression showed pleasure at her words. "I'm glad you think so. I've tried to build something that would last, that would grow over time." He drove up to the house and helped her down from the buggy. A man emerged from the barn, tall, weathered, with silver threading through his dark hair. "Miss Zimmer, this is Miguel Ortiz," Abram said. "He's my foreman and the best cattleman in the territory. Miguel, Miss Nathaniel Zimmer." "Pleased to meet you, Miss Zimmer," Miguel said, his English accented but clear. "Welcome to Triple G." "Thank you," Nathaniel replied. "It's a lovely property." Miguel smiled. "Abram has worked hard to make it so." He turned to Abram. "I'll take care of the horse, you show your lady the house." Abram led Nathaniel up the steps to the porch, which wrapped around two sides of the house. There were several comfortable-looking chairs and a small table, positioned to catch the afternoon shade and the view of the hills. "I sit here in the evening sometimes," Abram said, "watching the sunset. It's peaceful." He opened the front door and ushered her inside. The main room was larger than Nathaniel had expected, with a stone fireplace at one end, several bookshelves, a sturdy table with chairs, and comfortable seating arranged for conversation. The floors were wooden, polished to a soft sheen, with colorful rugs scattered about. Windows let in plenty of light, and there were lamps positioned for evening reading. "The kitchen is through here," Abram said, leading her to a spacious room with a large wood stove, ample work surfaces, and a round table by a window overlooking the garden. "I'm not much of a cook, I'm afraid." Miguel's wife, Elena, comes up from their cabin a few times a week to prepare meals that I reheat. The rest of the time I manage with simple fare. He showed her the pantry, well stocked with staples, and then led her back through the main room to a hallway. "There are 3 bedrooms," he explained. "Mine is here." He opened a door to reveal a simply furnished but comfortable room with a large bed, a chest of drawers, and a small desk. The middle one I use as a study and storage. This room held a desk covered with papers, bookshelves, and several trunks. And this one. He hesitated before opening the final door. The 3rd bedroom was clearly intended for a woman. The bed was covered with a handmade quilt in shades of blue and green. There was a dressing table with a mirror, a wardrobe, and a comfortable chair by the window, which had curtains that matched the quilt. A vase of wildflowers stood on a small table, filling the room with a subtle fragrance. "I wasn't sure what you'd like," Abram said, sounding uncharacteristically uncertain. Mrs. Ortiz helped with the furnishings. Nathaniel moved into the room, touched beyond words. The care that had gone into preparing this space for her was evident in every detail. This wasn't just a room, it was a statement of hope, of welcome. "It's perfect," she said softly, turning to face him. "Truly, it's lovely," relief showed in Abram's eyes. "I'm glad. I wanted you to have a space that felt like your own." He cleared his throat. "There's more to see outside if you're interested." They toured the rest of the ranch, the barn with its sturdy stalls and hayloft, the chicken coop, the smokehouse, the vegetable garden and small orchard. Miguel's wife, Elena, joined them, a warm woman who greeted Nathaniel with genuine friendliness and showed her the garden she tended with obvious pride. "These tomatoes will be ready soon," Elena said, indicating plants heavy with green fruit. "And the peppers are already producing. We preserve much for the winter months." By late afternoon, they had seen most of the ranch, and Nathaniel had a clearer picture of what life here would entail. It would be work steady, demanding work, but there was beauty in it, and a sense of purpose that appealed to her practical nature. They took their supper on the porch, enjoying the cooling evening air and the spectacular sunset that painted the western sky in shades of orange, pink, and purple. Elena had prepared a delicious meal of roast beef, potatoes, and fresh vegetables from the garden, with apple cobbler for dessert. As twilight deepened into darkness, Abram lit lamps in the house and brought one out to the porch. The light cast a golden glow over them as they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the chirping of crickets, the occasional call of a night bird. "What are you thinking?" Abram asked finally, his voice quiet in the gathering darkness. Nathaniel considered her answer carefully. "I'm thinking that you've built something remarkable here, Abram, something to be proud of," he nodded, accepting her words. "It's taken time, and there's still much to be done." He hesitated. "It would be a different life for you than what you knew in Philadelphia." "Yes," she agreed, "but perhaps a better one in many ways." Hope flickered in Abram's eyes. "Does that mean?" Nathaniel took a deep breath. "It means I'm seriously considering our arrangement. But I'd like a little more time, if that's all right." "Of course," Abram said immediately. "Take all the time you need." The ride back to Socorro was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. When they reached the boarding house, Abram helped her down from the buggy and walked her to the door. "Thank you for today," Nathaniel said. "For showing me your home." "Our home," Abram corrected gently, "if you decide to stay." The distinction wasn't lost on Nathaniel. This wasn't just about becoming Abram's wife, it was about creating a shared life, a partnership in the truest sense. "Good night, Abram," she said softly. "Good night, Nathaniel." He tipped his hat and returned to the buggy, casting one glance back before driving away. Inside, Nathaniel found Mrs. Wilkins waiting up for her, curious about her impressions of the ranch. Nathaniel shared her thoughts, finding that putting them into words helped clarify her own feelings. "It sounds like a fine place," Mrs. Wilkins said when she had finished, "and Abram Garrett is a fine man. But only you can decide if it's the right life for you." Nathaniel nodded, grateful for the landlady's understanding. "I think I'm close to a decision," she admitted. "I just need to be sure." That night in her room, Nathaniel wrote in her journal again, pouring out her thoughts and feelings about the day, about Abram, about the possibility of a future at the Triple G Ranch. The words flowed easily, and as she wrote, a sense of clarity began to emerge. The next morning, Nathaniel woke with a decision in her mind. After breakfast, she asked Mrs. Wilkins if she might borrow pen and paper to write a letter. "Of course, dear," the landlady said. "Use the desk in the parlor if you like. You'll have privacy there this time of day." Nathaniel thanked her and spent the next hour composing a careful letter to her former neighbor in Philadelphia, asking her to pack and send the few personal items Nathaniel had left in storage, their books, her mother's silver hairbrush and mirror, a small portrait of her parents, and a few keepsakes. She included money for the shipping costs, using some of what Abram had given her. After sealing the letter, she walked to the post office, enjoying the warmth of the morning and the activity of the town. Socorro was becoming familiar to her now. The shopkeepers nodded in recognition, and several people called greetings as she passed. At the post office, she encountered Deputy Wilson, who tipped his hat in greeting. "Miss Zimmer, good morning. How are you settling in?" "Quite well, thank you," she replied. "Any news of the man from Santa Fe?" The deputy's expression turned serious. "Nothing definite. but there was word of a man matching his description in Tucson, headed south. If it's Blackwell, he's moving away from here, which is good news for you. Nathaniel nodded, relieved. The fear of Blackwell's return had been a shadow on her thoughts, though she had tried not to let it dominate her decisions. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "I appreciate your keeping me informed." "Of course, miss, that's my job." He hesitated. "I understand you visited the Triple G yesterday. Abram Garrett's a good man, one of the best in these parts." Nathaniel smiled, used to the way everyone in Socorro seemed to approve of Abram. "So I've been told repeatedly, and I'm inclined to agree," the deputy smiled back. "Well, that's good to hear. Socorro would be lucky to keep you, Miss Zimmer." After mailing her letter, Nathaniel walked to Mrs. Diaz's shop to check on the progress of her new dresses. The seamstress greeted her warmly and showed her the nearly completed garments, one a practical day dress in a soft green, the other a more formal dress in deep burgundy. "For special occasions," Mrs. Diaz said with a knowing smile. "Every woman needs at least one such dress, no?" "They're beautiful," Nathaniel said, running her fingers over the fine fabric. "Your work is exquisite." "I have something else to show you," Mrs. Diaz said, bringing out a package wrapped in tissue paper. She opened it to reveal a wedding dress, simple but elegant, in cream-colored silk with delicate embroidery around the collar and cuffs. "I've been working on this between other orders," Mrs. Diaz explained. "When Mr. Garrett first wrote that he was expecting a bride, several of us women thought you might appreciate having a proper dress for the occasion, should you decide to stay." Nathaniel stared at the dress, deeply touched by the gesture. "Mrs. Diaz, I don't know what to say." "This is too generous." The seamstress waved away her protest. "It's our welcome gift. Socorro is a small town, but we take care of our own," she smiled. "And we hope you will be one of us." Later that afternoon, Abram called at the boarding house as had become their custom. They sat in the parlor, sharing news of their day. Nathaniel told him about her visit to Mrs. Diaz, though not about the wedding dress. "The people here have been very kind," she said. "More welcoming than I expected." "Socorro folk are good people," Abram agreed. "Life out here can be hard. We rely on each other more than folks might back east." "I've noticed that," Nathaniel said. "There's a sense of community that's quite different from Philadelphia." They talked for a while longer, their conversation flowing easily now, weeks of daily visits having worn away the initial awkwardness between them. When it was time for Abram to leave, Nathaniel walked with him to the door. "Abram," she said as he reached for his hat, "would you be free tomorrow afternoon? I'd like to talk to you about something important." His eyes searched her face, but he didn't press for details. "Of course, same time." "Yes, please," she smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Until tomorrow, then." That evening, Nathaniel sat down with Mrs. Wilkins and explained her decision. The landlady listened without interruption, then patted Nathaniel's hand warmly. "I think you've made a wise choice, my dear, and I'm very happy for you both." The next day seemed to stretch endlessly as Nathaniel waited for Abram's arrival. She had dressed with care in one of her new dresses, the green one that Mrs. Diaz had delivered that morning. She had arranged her hair neatly and even pinned one of the wildflowers from Mrs. Wilkins' garden to her bodice. When Abram finally arrived, exactly at the appointed time, Nathaniel was waiting in the parlor, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to hide their slight trembling. He entered the room, hat in hand, and stopped short when he saw her. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Nathaniel felt a blush warm her cheeks. "Thank you. Please sit down." Abram took his usual chair across from her, his expression calm but with a question in his eyes. "I've been thinking a great deal about our arrangement," Nathaniel began, her voice steady despite her nervousness. "About what it would mean to stay here, to become your wife." Abram nodded, waiting for her to continue. "When I first came to Socorro, I was hurt and frightened. What happened in Santa Fe made me doubt everything: my decision to come west, my judgment of people, my own strength." She met his eyes directly. "But these past weeks have shown me that I'm stronger than I thought, and that there are good people in the world, people worth trusting." Abram's expression softened, but still he remained silent, giving her the space to say what she needed to say. "I've come to know you, Abram Garrett. You're a man of your word, honorable and kind. You've been patient beyond what most men would be. You've shown me your home, your life, without pressure or expectations." She took a deep breath. "And I find that I want to be part of that life if you'll still have me." The hope that bloomed in Abram's eyes was unmistakable. "Are you saying yes, Nathaniel, to being my wife?" "I am," she said, a smile breaking across her face. "Yes, I'll marry you, Abram." He was across the room in an instant, kneeling before her chair, taking her hands in his. "You've made me the happiest man in the territory," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I promise you won't regret this decision. I'll do everything in my power to make you happy, to keep you safe." Nathaniel squeezed his hands, feeling a surge of joy that surprised her with its intensity. "I believe you will, and I'll do the same for you." They looked at each other for a long moment, both smiling, both a little overwhelmed by the significance of the moment. Then, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Abram leaned forward and kissed her gently on the lips. It was a brief kiss, sweet and full of promise. When he drew back, Nathaniel saw in his eyes all the things he wasn't yet saying: the growing affection, the deep respect, the hope for their future together. "When?" he asked simply. "Soon," Nathaniel replied. "I don't see any reason to wait long. I've written to Philadelphia for a few personal items, but we needn't wait for their arrival. 2 weeks, perhaps. That should be enough time to make the necessary arrangements." 2 weeks, Abram agreed, his smile widening. "I can be ready whenever you are." They spent the next hour discussing practical matters: the wedding ceremony, simple, at the church. The guest list, small, just the people of Socorro who had become friends, and their life afterward at the ranch. Through it all, there was an undercurrent of excitement, of rightness, that confirmed to Nathaniel she had made the correct decision. When Abram finally left, promising to return the next day, Nathaniel found herself standing on the porch long after his departure, watching the spot where he had disappeared around the corner. Her heart felt lighter than it had in years, filled with a hope she had almost forgotten was possible. Mrs. Wilkins found her there and stood beside her, a knowing smile on her face. "So it's settled then?" "Yes," Nathaniel confirmed, her own smile returning. 2 weeks from Sunday at the church. Will you stand with me? I have no family here and you've been so kind." "I would be honored, Mrs. Wilkins said, genuine pleasure in her voice. "Now we have much to plan. Come inside and we'll make a list of everything that needs to be done." The next 2 weeks passed in a whirl of activity. Word spread quickly through Socorro that Abram Garrett and his mail-order bride were to be married, and the town responded with enthusiasm. Mrs. Diaz put the finishing touches on the wedding dress. The women of the church organized a small reception to follow the ceremony. Oscar Hoffman presented Nathaniel with a set of fine china as a wedding gift from him and his wife. Even Deputy Wilson contributed, arranging for a special marriage license to be issued without the usual waiting period. Abram came to town every day, sometimes helping with preparations, sometimes taking Nathaniel for quiet drives in the countryside. Their relationship deepened with each meeting, growing from mutual respect into something warmer, more intimate, not yet love, perhaps, but moving steadily in that direction. They talked of their future together, making plans for the ranch, discussing how they would merge their lives. Abram listened carefully to Nathaniel's ideas, treating her as a partner rather than a subordinate, which pleased her immensely. In turn, she respected his knowledge of ranching and the territory, deferring to his experience in matters where he clearly knew best. 2 days before the wedding, a package arrived from Philadelphia, the personal items Nathaniel had requested. She unpacked them in her room at the boarding house, touching each familiar object with a sense of closure. These remnants of her old life would find a place in her new one, bridging the gap between past and future. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and perfect, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of desert flowers. Nathaniel awoke early, her stomach fluttering with nerves and anticipation. Mrs. Wilkins and several other women from town came to help her prepare, bringing small gifts and words of advice for the bride. The wedding dress fit perfectly, its simple elegance suiting Nathaniel's natural grace. Mrs. Wilkins arranged her hair, weaving small white flowers through the auburn strands, and Miss Palmer presented her with a lace handkerchief, borrowed for the occasion to satisfy tradition. "Something old," Mrs. Wilkins said, pointing to the silver hairpins Nathaniel had brought from Philadelphia. "Something new," added Mrs. Diaz, indicating the dress. "Something borrowed," Miss Palmer said, touching the handkerchief. "And something blue," Elena Ortiz finished, presenting Nathaniel with a delicate blue ribbon to tie around her bouquet of wildflowers. At precisely 11 o'clock, a buggy arrived to take Nathaniel to the church. Miguel Ortiz himself had come to drive her, dressed in his Sunday best, his normally weathered face split by a wide smile. "Abram is already at the church," he told her as he helped her into the buggy. Very nervous, but very happy. The small church was full when they arrived, with seemingly the entire population of Socorro turned out for the occasion. As Miguel escorted her down the aisle, Nathaniel saw familiar faces on every side: shopkeepers, ranchers and their wives, boarders from Mrs. Wilkins, even the banker and his family, and there at the front, waiting beside Reverend Mills, stood Abram. He was dressed in a new suit, his hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. But it was his expression when he saw her that Nathaniel would remember forever, a look of such joy, such wonder, that it took her breath away. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, with Reverend Mills speaking of partnership, respect, and the building of a life together. When it came time for the vows, Abram's voice rang clear and strong through the church. Nathaniel's response was softer but no less sincere, her heart full as she promised to be a faithful wife to this man, who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect since her arrival in Socorro. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Mills declared. "You may kiss your bride." Abram's kiss was gentle, reverent, but with a warmth that promised more when they were alone. Applause broke out among the congregation, followed by cheers and congratulations, as the newly married couple turned to face their friends. The reception that followed on the church lawn was a joyous affair, with food contributed by many of the townspeople, music provided by a local fiddler and his companions, and a general atmosphere of celebration. Nathaniel and Abram moved among their guests, accepting good wishes and advice, sharing the happiness of the day. As the afternoon waned, they prepared to depart for the Triple G Ranch, their home now together. Abram had decorated the buggy with ribbons and flowers, and Miguel had ensured that their path would be clear, riding ahead to make certain all was ready at the ranch. Just before they left, Deputy Wilson approached them, his expression serious despite the festive occasion. "I have news," he said quietly. "Word came by telegraph this morning. Edwin Blackwell was caught trying to cross into Mexico. He's being held in Tucson, awaiting trial for multiple charges. He won't be troubling you again, Mrs. Garrett." Nathaniel felt a wave of relief so profound it made her knees weak. Abram's arm tightened around her waist, supporting her. "Thank you, Deputy," she said. "That's welcome news indeed. Considered it my wedding gift," Wilson replied with a smile. "Safe journey home, both of you." As they drove away from Socorro, waving to their friends until the town receded in the distance, Nathaniel leaned against Abram's shoulder, a sense of peace settling over her. The ordeal that had brought her to New Mexico territory, the journey, the attack, the fear seemed distant now, overshadowed by the promise of the future spreading before them. "Happy?" Abram asked, his eyes on the road but his attention clearly on her. "Yes," Nathaniel answered truthfully. "More than I expected to be when I first arrived," he smiled, glancing down at her. "That day at the stagecoach stop, when I saw you standing there, hurt and frightened, I wanted to find whoever had harmed you and make them pay. But more than that, I wanted to make you feel safe again." "You did," she said softly. "You do." They rode in comfortable silence for a time, the landscape unfolding around them, beautiful in the late afternoon light. Nathaniel thought about the strange path that had led her here, to this moment, to this man. How differently things might have turned out if she hadn't answered that advertisement, if she hadn't found the courage to leave Philadelphia, if she hadn't escaped Blackwell's clutches in Santa Fe. "What are you thinking?" Abram asked, noticing her pensive expression. "That life takes unexpected turns," she replied, "and sometimes what seems like the worst moment can lead to something good. He nodded, understanding. I believe that. After the war, when I was drifting, not sure of my place in the world. If someone had told me I'd find this kind of happiness, I wouldn't have believed them. As they approached the Triple G Ranch, Nathaniel saw that preparations had been made for their arrival. Lanterns were lit along the drive, and the house looked warm and welcoming in the gathering dusk. Elena and Miguel stood on the porch, ready to greet the newlyweds. Abram helped her down from the buggy, then surprised her by sweeping her into his arms and carrying her up the steps and over the threshold, both of them laughing at the traditional gesture. "Welcome home, Mrs. Garrett," he said, setting her gently on her feet in the main room of the house, their house now. "It's good to be home," she replied, and meant it. Later, after a celebration supper with Miguel and Elena, after the Ortizes had returned to their cabin with final congratulations, Abram and Nathaniel found themselves alone for the first time as husband and wife. There was a moment of awkwardness, of natural shyness as they stood in the main room, the reality of their new relationship settling around them. Then Abram took her hand, his touch gentle. "Nathaniel," he said quietly, "I want you to know that I'll never rush you, never force anything. We have time to grow together, to learn each other. Tonight and every night should be something we both want." The tenderness in his words, the respect they conveyed, touched Nathaniel deeply. In that moment, something shifted within her, the last barrier of reserve, of caution, falling away to reveal a deeper emotion. "I trust you, Abram," she said, stepping closer to him. "I have from the beginning, I think, even when I was too afraid to admit it." He smiled, drawing her into his arms. "And I'll spend the rest of my life earning that trust." Their kiss this time was different, slower, deeper, full of promise and growing desire. When they finally parted, Nathaniel knew with certainty that this man, this place, was where she belonged. In the days and weeks that followed, Nathaniel and Abram settled into life together at the Triple G Ranch. There were adjustments, of course, learning each other's habits and preferences, finding a rhythm to their days that accommodated both her household duties and his work with the cattle. Nathaniel took over the running of the house with natural efficiency, applying the skills she had developed in Philadelphia to her new surroundings. She worked alongside Elena in the garden, learning which plants thrived in the New Mexico soil, which needed extra care. She mastered the art of cooking on a wood stove, making meals that brought a smile to Abram's face at the end of his long days. Abram, for his part, took obvious pleasure in sharing his knowledge of the ranch with her. He taught her to ride properly, laughing at her initial clumsiness, but praising her determination. He showed her the best places to find wildflowers in the spring, the hidden pools along the creek where fish gathered in the summer heat, the vista points where the sunset was most spectacular. And in the quiet of their nights together, they discovered each other as husband and wife, their physical relationship deepening alongside their emotional one. Abram was as gentle and considerate a lover as he was a husband, patient with Nathaniel's inexperience, attentive to her responses. Under his tender guidance, she blossomed, finding joy in their intimacy and a growing confidence in her own desires. Autumn came to the territory, bringing cooler nights and the golden hues of changing leaves along the creek. Nathaniel and Abram traveled to Socorro regularly, maintaining their friendships in town while building their life together at the ranch. On one such visit, they brought news that caused a flurry of excitement among their friends. "A baby," Mrs. Wilkins exclaimed, clasping her hands together. "Oh, my dear, how wonderful," Nathaniel nodded, unable to contain her smile. "Due in the spring, Dr. Jenkins says. April, most likely." The expected child brought a new dimension to their relationship, a shared anticipation that bound them even closer. Abram was solicitous of Nathaniel's comfort as her body changed, insisting she rest when needed, bringing her ginger tea for morning sickness, even reading medical books to better understand what she was experiencing. "I never thought I'd be a father," he confessed one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. His hand rested gently on her growing belly where the baby had just kicked. "After the war, after drifting so long, it seemed like a life meant for other men, not me." Nathaniel covered his hand with her own. "And now," His eyes, when they met hers, held a depth of emotion that took her breath away. "Now I can't imagine anything else. This life with you, with our child, it's more than I ever dared to hope for." The winter of 1875-76 was mild by New Mexico standards, with only a few light snows that quickly melted under the desert sun. Nathaniel's pregnancy progressed normally, her body adapting to its changing state with minimal discomfort. She remained active, helping with household tasks, joining Abram for short rides when the weather permitted, preparing for the baby's arrival with practical efficiency. They converted the third bedroom, the one that had been prepared for Nathaniel before their marriage, into a nursery, furnishing it with a cradle that Miguel crafted from pine, a rocking chair that had belonged to Alina's mother, and soft blankets knitted by the women of Socorro as gifts for the coming child. As spring approached, bringing with it the promise of renewal, Nathaniel found herself reflecting on the journey that had led her to this place, this life. The mail-order bride who had arrived hurt and scared had become a rancher's wife, soon to be a mother, confident in her place in this wild, beautiful territory. The baby, a boy they named William Thomas Garrett, was born on a perfect April morning, with Dr. Jenkins attending and Alina assisting. Abram paced outside until the doctor called him in to meet his son, a robust child with a shock of dark hair and his father's blue eyes. "He's perfect," Abram whispered, holding his son for the first time, his voice thick with emotion. "Nathaniel, he's absolutely perfect." Nathaniel watched them together, her heart so full it seemed it might burst. In that moment, with her husband and newborn son, she knew a happiness she had never imagined possible when she first stepped off the stagecoach in Socorro. "I love you," she said, the words coming easily now, natural and true. "Both of you." Abram looked up, his eyes meeting hers, shining with tears and joy. "And I love you, Nathaniel Garrett, more than I have words to express." The years that followed brought changes to the Triple G Ranch and to the Garrett family. The cattle herd grew, allowing them to purchase additional land to the north. The house expanded to accommodate their growing family. William was joined by a sister, Sarah, 2 years later, and then by another brother, James, 3 years after that. Socorro grew as well, with the railroad's arrival bringing new settlers and opportunities. Abram became a respected figure in the community, serving on committees and helping shape the territory's development. Nathaniel, too, found her place, organizing a lending library for the town and teaching reading classes for the children of ranch workers. They faced challenges, of course, droughts that threatened the cattle, financial setbacks when beef prices dropped, illnesses and accidents that are the common lot of frontier families. But through it all, their partnership remained strong, each supporting the other, their love deepening with shared experiences, both joyful and difficult. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Abram surprised Nathaniel with a special gift, a locket containing miniature portraits of their 3 children, painted by an artist who had recently settled in Socorro. "To remind you always of what we've built together," he said as he fastened it around her neck. Nathaniel touched the locket, then reached up to caress his face, still handsome though now lined with a decade of sun and wind and laughter. "As if I could ever forget," she murmured, drawing him down for a kiss. Later that night, with the children asleep and the house quiet, they sat on the porch as they had so many evenings before, watching the stars emerge in the vast New Mexico sky. Nathaniel leaned against Abram's shoulder, content in the silence that comes from years of companionship. "Do you ever think about it?" Abram asked after a time. "About that first day when you arrived in Socorro?" "Sometimes," Nathaniel admitted. "It seems like another lifetime now, another person. I was so frightened, so unsure." "You were also brave," Abram said, his arm tightening around her. "Braver than you knew," she smiled, acknowledging the truth in his words. "Perhaps, but I found my courage here with you." She turned to face him. "When you said no one would touch me again without my permission, when you gave me time and space to heal, to decide. That was the moment my life truly began to change." Abram kissed her then, a kiss that held all the years of their shared history, all the promise of their future together. When they drew apart, he looked into her eyes, his own reflecting the depth of his feelings. "I thank God every day that you chose to stay," he said simply. "That you chose me, chose this life." "The best choice I ever made," Nathaniel replied, her heart as full now as it had been on their wedding day, as it had been when each of their children was born. "And one I would make again, 1,000 times over." Together, they turned back to the night sky, to the stars that had witnessed their journey from mail-order arrangement to deep and abiding love. The Triple G Ranch spread around them, peaceful in the darkness, a testament to what could be built from humble beginnings, from trust, from partnership, from two people finding in each other exactly what they needed most. And Nathaniel Garrett, once a frightened young woman stepping off a stagecoach into an uncertain future, knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be home, in every sense of the word, with the man who had promised her safety and given her so much more.